G'day everyone, and what a wonderfully messed up world we have to discuss today. Well, you can probably imagine where this is going. We're going to discuss the incident at the Capitol briefly, but go a little more into it than you might otherwise see in the press. Okay. What went wrong at the Capitol building? Lies, the power of lies, having a president supported by a pretty biased media organisation on his side of politics, along with the unfortunately large reach of not only the president on Twitter, but also a number of his supporters, I guess you could call them that, has created this sort of incredibly large alternative belief system in the last 2 months, whereby, pardon me, about a third of Americans obviously voted for Trump, of adult eligible voters, but of those, probably more than half of them, which is 40 million people, now believe that the election was stolen, despite the fact that there's no evidence. No one ever presented any evidence. The Trump campaign took this issue to court well over 50 times, and the reason they lost every one of those cases is at no point did they submit any evidence. Now, having Fox News say the election was stolen doesn't make it true. You could say any number of things. You say the grass is purple and the sky is green. It doesn't make it true. The problem is power lies where people think it lies. Okay, so when the top echelon of government is telling everyone this was stolen from us, of course Trump doesn't say him, he says us. It was stolen from us and you've got to do something about it. A lot of these persons are clearly quite motivated to do so. And the power of a lie, man. So the problem of what happened at the Capitol, it isn't just what happened, it's why it happened. The power of that propaganda. And you see that in many different ways. Now, there's been a lot of whataboutism about the violent insurrection at the Capitol. An example of that would be the false equivalence between that and the Black Lives Matter protest we saw earlier last year. Neither of those is the correct way to go about achieving your aims. Protests on the street, I'm always going to support that, basically, always. Protest, not necessarily or ever violence. Okay, so there was a lot of retarded activity that took place around the Black Lives Matter protest, and a lot of it wasn't actually instigated by persons who were in the protest. It was nut jobs turn up, any form of protest, using an excuse to create trouble. Part of it was that. Now, Black Lives Matter in terms of violence and property damage, if we're going to be honest here, it went entirely too far and it was counterproductive to their aims. Gained a lot of attention, but it wasn't the right way to go about things. You know what else wasn't the right way to go about things? Invading the Capitol with arms during the constitutionally mandated process of certifying the Electoral College votes. On paper, yeah, that actually is worse. So I don't want to see, oh, well, BLM did it too. First of all, they shouldn't have. Second of all, they kind of didn't, because the stuff they were doing was in their communities. Now, again, I'm not supporting the acts of violence, but they did not invade the Capitol building during a constitutionally mandated process of certifying the will of the voters under arms with the explicit intention of disrupting that process. Look, was it a coup? It wasn't overly well organised, but there was some organisation. But what the worry here is that the words of one man, the false words, have led people to kill at the Capitol, to willingly go to jail for decades, all kinds of things based off a lie with no evidence. There's nothing even circumstantial about it. So the power of lies is what worries me. Because Mr. Trump, I've said this before, but Mr. Trump is not a particularly ideological man, as you may or may not know. He's been a registered Democrat for 10 years, he's been a registered Republican for 10 years, and he's also run as an independent. The ridiculous preposterousness he's spreading about this alleged stolen election, he's not really trying to achieve anything other than make himself look good. And that's in America's interests compared to the alternative, which we're about to get to. Because the alternative type of leader, this type of strongman who disregards the rule of law, undermines the the judicial and legislative branches of government to achieve their own ends. The United States basically has a dictator in all but name. The problem is the precedent he sets. Now, some of you watching this think I'm full of crap if you haven't turned off already and believe the election was stolen. And for our intents, okay, that's cool. I mean, what someone perceives to be true is always far more important to them than what the objective truth is. That's never going to change. But the risk is this: by allowing his supporters, allowing this man to carry out such incredible acts against the government and against the rule of law, Americans aren't setting themselves up to vote in another Donald Trump. They're setting themselves up to vote in someone far, far much worse, because Trump doesn't have an agenda apart from looking good. What I'm worried about is that sooner or later in the United States, by extension any Western democracy, is going to elect an actual right-wing dictator. And because we've allowed Mr. Trump to carry on with such absurdities for so long and debase the office of the presidency, we've actually in some ways almost encouraged that to happen. He's set precedents of ignoring the rule of law that can now be used again and again and again and again by every future president on either side. Some damage can't be undone, and the damage that this Fox News / Trump driven lie about this stolen election has done, this could well be a fissure for the next 40 or 50 years. It's going to be a major problem. So the only advice I can really give on this, not that anyone will ever really see it, is try to separate emotion from fact. It's the argument that the Democrats somehow used voting machines to, with no evidence, allegedly manipulate the election. Don't just believe that because you got told it, because there's a hell of a lot of people who went to Capitol Hill who are going to do the next 10 to 20 years in federal prison because of their actions they took in support of something that I strongly suspect deep down inside they knew was a lie too. Just like you do. See? We separate emotion from fact. Fact is more important than emotion, but people rate emotion above fact. Let's remember, if you're going to commit your life to a cause or potentially bring about the destruction of your own nation state, try to make sure that what you're doing it for actually exists and isn't just propaganda. Because what I'm afraid the United States has done is laid the groundwork for someone who actually does have an agenda and really doesn't like the rule of law. Or, even worse, they really like the rule of law and they end up with the entire military apparatus on their side. Now that would be a dictatorship. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Fact before fiction. Street sociology.